Dear friends, I'm very happy to say that uh, I am given an opportunity by the organizers of this conference to make a presentation. My paper is entitled Global Education Policy and its Financial Implications. Global education aims at developing a holistic perspective in education in order to help people to understand complex realities. It enables them to develop values, attitude, knowledge, and skill to face the challenges of the interconnected world. The policy also aims to highlight gaps between current practices and what would be more effective in promoting learning. These best practices to be adopted are formulated on the basis of evidences and experiences of several nations. Learning crisis is a global issue. Around 300 million children have no access to basic education. They are illiterates. Several other children who attend school classes have poor ability to write and read. They are very poor in basic arithmetic and possess poor ability to understand and interpret. The learning crisis is acute in poor nations of Africa and Asia. Main reasons for the poor education is lack of finance. Financial difficulties leads to a situation where there is no teacher to teach or only untrained teachers to teach. It further leads to no classroom, lack of learning materials, high distance from home to school, and exclusion of children with disabilities from the learning process. Children in poor nations are living in unfavorable environment. They are living in a country in conflict or at the risk of conflict. Hunger and poor nutrition are also seriously felt by them. Owing to widespread poverty, political tension, and other unfavorable factors, many children, particularly girls, are forced to stop their education at the primary level itself to support their family. They take care of the young babies in the home when the parents are away for work. Apart from these dropouts from education, several children are unable to attend the classes on a regular basis because of their household responsibilities. The above mentioned interrelated problems that hamper the quality of education here in poor nations are directly influenced and determined by the financial factors. The three main sources of educational financing are government, household, and donors. The GEM report 2019 estimates the worldwide spending on education per year is nearly 4.7 US dollar in trillion. Around 65% of it is spent in high income countries and only 0.5% in low income countries. That is, the expenditure in low income countries is only 22 million US dollars. The number of the number of school age children in these two groups means in the rich countries and in the poor countries are almost the same. But you can see that there is a wide gap in expenditure on education in these two groups of nations. In the rich nations, around 65% of the total expenditure on education is made, whereas only 0.5% is made in the very poor nations. Governments account for 79% of the total spending and households for 21% of the spending in education. Each nation is expected to spend a minimum of 4% of its gross domestic product, GDP, on education. According to the study made by GEM, globally, the median public expenditure on education was 4.4% in 2017. It is observed that Out of 148 countries under study, 43 countries do not meet the benchmark of 4%. In several African nations, the expenditure on education was less than even 3% of the GDP. The GDP of these nations are very low, and the expenditure in education is also a low portion of the gross domestic product. You can see that the financial difficulties faced by these nations badly affect the development of education. The distribution of education, both in terms of quality and quantity, are uneven in most societies. Inequality is not found with reference to individuals only. It is observed in urban and rural areas. Education system is generally urban biased. Allocation of finance and facilities are in favor of urban areas. Inequality of education opportunities start at the school level. Most of the good schools and institutions of higher learning are located in urban areas. These institutions favor students from the urban areas than from the rural areas for admission. The consequences of urban bias in education is the neglect of education in villages where majority of the people live. To overcome this difficulty, government support for universal free education is needed. Emphasis should be given to ensure good quality education in villages. If this inequality persists, education cannot help in upward social mobility. So what I say is, inequality in education is not felt at the individual level alone, or inequality is not observed in between nations. Even in a nation, the education is urban biased. More importance is given to urban education. Better quality education is given to the people who belong to the urban area, whereas the people of the rural area are neglected. We should try to make an end to this problem by providing more educational facilities, allocating more finance, emphasizing the importance of education in the rural areas. Global education policy and intervention of multinationals, international institutions, and other donors to promote education became more relevant after the 1980s. We all know that after 1980s, the globalization process started. Globalization was given more importance. In 1990s, in the beginning of the 1990s, when Manmohan Singh was the finance minister and Narasimha Rao was the prime minister, the structural adjustment program, the new economic policy was introduced in India, and India also joined the globalization process. This is not a problem. This is not a development connected with some nations alone. This is a worldwide phenomenon. Globalization process, it was a worldwide phenomenon. But what I want to say is, these developments are a part of the process of globalization. Now the situation has changed. The COVID-19 pandemic is a rupture in the history of mankind. It has badly affected the social, political, and economic life of human beings. The crisis had deep impact in the public finance and fiscal and monetary policies of all nations. Poor nations are forced to increase deficit financing to correct the budget deficit. Now the world economy faces recession on the one side and inflation on the other. It results in stagflation. Nations have become nationalistic in their approach. This is the reversal of globalization, where after this pandemic, now the globalization has less relevance, and most of the nations are trying to solve the problem at the national level. So the globalization process is having less significance now. Several countries have adopted protectionist policies to fight against the pandemic. It is worth examining how global education policy can be effectively implemented in this situation. This is a very important problem. I have apprehensions related to the pandemic and the implementation of global education policy now. But when we take the persisting inequalities in the national and international level in education, and the problems encountered by more than 300 million children in the world related to the education, we have to overcome this crisis. And for that, a global education policy is essential. Even though all the problems, including pandemic, persist in the world, global education policy is essential. It enables us to reduce the gap between the poor and rich in education. The responsibility to provide education must be taken by the governments. Education should never be made a commodity to sell in the market and make profit. Nowadays, in many instances, education is also considered as a commodity to be sold. Education is considered as a business activity. It should be stopped. That is my humble request. It is a service to be imparted, but education is a service to be imparted free of cost. As suggested by Jagadguru Swami Isha, education for total consciousness is a complete system of education. It can serve mankind, nature, and the cosmos or as a whole. All nations of the world should consider education as a basic need like food, shelter, clothes, and find out finance for that. Thank you very much.